who here has ever met someone and everything in your mind and your logic and rationale said, nope, don't go there, unhealthy, toxic. But everything in your body was like, yes! And then you went ahead with it anyway. If you can relate, raise your hand. Okay, cool. So it seems like we have a common problem here. And why is this so? Why is it when our brain tells us one thing, but our body and our urges tell us to do something completely different? Well, the issue is not because you're crazy or that something's wrong with you. It's just that you haven't quite figured out the science and psychology behind how love actually works in the brain. I am the founder of a company called Renew Breakup Bootcamp. We take a scientific and spiritual approach to healing and rewiring the heart. Now, every single time when people come to Renew, they think that they're coming because of their ex. And the actual thing is, and they realize this soon when they come to the retreat, is it's got nothing to do with the ex or the ex before that, because it's all about recycled pain. You see, we recreate the emotional experience of how we were wounded as children. This is important. We recreate the emotional experience of how we were wounded as children. And so a lot of the times, we are so caught up trying to affect change by changing the environment. So for example, you could say, oh my God, dating in New York sucks, I'm gonna move to LA, right? Just change the environment, or you might change the people. It's a lead generation issue. Now, the next level of change that people try to do is behavior. And this is when people ask me, so how long should I wait until I have sex with the person? Or, okay, he just texted me, should I wait 4 hours or should I just text him the next day and make him wait? And that way, he's gonna think that, I'm not too into him, but I'm still kind of cool. Again, that's changing the behavior. And you can affect change that way, but it's very hard to sustain and it doesn't usually last. Now, the other way of affecting change is actually going into the nucleus, which is the beliefs. Because when you change the beliefs, there is an automatic ripple effect into your behavior and your environment. So the first thing I want to talk about is attachment theory. Who here has heard of it? If you have, hold up your hand. Awesome. What a conscious, aware group. I'm at the assemblage. Cool. Okay, well, we can never get enough of attachment theory. I'm going to talk to you about the 3 different kinds. I'm going to first go over each type of attachment style, and then I'm going to drill down to each one specifically, and so that you can see which one resonates with you the most. So, attachment theory is something that's been tested all around the world for a couple decades now. It's been studied, over thousands and thousands of studies have confirmed that the way that we attach to our primary caregiver when we're just around 2-3 years old pretty much defines the way that we are going to relate romantically as adults. And so there's 3 main different attachment styles. They're secure, anxious, and avoidant. 50% of the population has a secure attachment style. So this is when the parents were sensitive and in tune to the needs of the child, weren't overbearing, weren't smothering, weren't neglectful, didn't abandon. And what happens is that child grows up thinking and understanding that they can trust their primary caregiver, and then they can trust their romantic partner. Now, studies show that people who have a secure attachment style have the most success in relationships. They feel the most happy, they feel the most fulfilled, there's less divorce rates. And they have an ability to self-soothe. So when there's an issue that comes up with their partner, instead of taking something and turning it into a huge catastrophe, they're able to talk it through, they're able to vocalize and communicate their boundaries and their needs in a healthy way. Now, if that's you, that's amazing. But for 25% of the population, they fall under the avoidant category. Now, those who have an avoidant attachment system subconsciously suppress their attachment system so that when someone gets too close, they will actually do distancing strategies to actually keep an emotional or mental distance to the person. Now, the last kind is anxious attachment style, and they come from an inconsistent caregiving. So sometimes they had their needs met as a child, sometimes they didn't. And what happens is it wires into this child's brain that they may or may not get their needs met, so it becomes very unpredictable. And so when they grow up, their nervous system is actually very heightened. In fact, they've done studies that show that out of all the different attachment styles, people have an anxious attachment style are the quickest to perceive an offset emotion to someone because they had to learn at a very young age to be able to read their primary caregivers to see if they're going to get fed or their needs met. And so what happens is when someone who has an anxious attachment style gets triggered, their nervous system goes crazy until that they can reestablish a connection or understand that their relationship is not under threat, and then they can calm down. So now again, I'm going to explain the 3 different attachment styles, and as I'm talking, I just want you to take a mental checklist in your head and see which one resonates with you the most. Secure, they're not afraid of intimacy. They're also not codependent. They're able to talk through their emotions, and during times of turbulence, they're able to communicate their needs and their boundaries in a healthy way. Those who have an avoidant attachment style, you might have had a parent who enmeshed you, meaning they were overly anxious about your every move, they were smothering, they were overly controlling. They might have lived vicariously through your achievements. Basically, they had their own needs met by living them through you. If you constantly feel guilt or you feel sorry for one of your primary caregivers, this may be an indication that you have an avoidant attachment style. Now, if you have grown up and you have an avoidant attachment style, this is what happens when you have intimacy. You might pursue a relationship wanting a partnership or connection, but when the relationship actually becomes a possible reality, you do what's called distancing mechanism, where you'll actually subconsciously push that person away. So how does this look like? Perhaps you had an incredible, loving weekend with your partner, and then immediately feel the need to withdraw from them, and you don't contact them for about a week. You might go into your cave a lot. You might always be holding out for the one. There's this idea that there's this perfect unicorn, and each person just doesn't fit the bill. And you can get into a relationship, but usually around the 1 month to 3 month mark, that's when you start seeing like, there's all these imperfections. Nope, you're just not the one. You might even create relationships with people who have an impossible future, because all these ways are ways to avoid intimacy from coming too close and taking away your freedom, your independence, and your autonomy. Now, the last one, anxious attachment style. This is you if you had inconsistent caregiving, if you were a child of neglect, if you had abandonment, and this could be physical abandonment where there was a death in the family from one of your primary caregivers, or a divorce, or emotional abandonment. Perhaps your needs were never met by one of your caregivers, emotional avoidance from one of your caregivers. And so basically, as an adult, you have a lot of anxiety about relationships. You're constantly obsessing about relationships, thinking about them, talking about them. You're always looking for evidence that the person that you're with is going to leave you. You're always looking for evidence that the belief you have, which I'm going to be rejected or abandoned at any minute, is going to come true. And this makes you very antsy. You have a tendency to be codependent and needy with your partner. In fact, if you were able to, you would completely just merge into one. You want to be with your partner all the time. If that rings true to you, these might be indications that you have an anxious attachment style. Now, the interesting thing is avoidants are drawn to anxious, and anxious are drawn to avoidance. They both reconfirm the storyline that they truly believe. So avoidance and avoidance, they can't come together because there's not enough emotional glue. But when they're with an anxious, they already believe like, oh my gosh, I'm going to get crowded, I'm going to get suffocated. And then they meet someone or draw them in that reconfirms this belief that they have. And for the anxious, who is so afraid of being abandoned and rejected, they date an avoidant because it reconfirms that they're going to get abandoned or rejected at any time. Now, the whole key is you can actually change your attachment style. And the way they've actually looked at attachment systems is they've done studies and looked at toddlers and how they reacted with their mother when the mother left the room. And then they followed these children up to when they were adults and saw that the attachment style stays pretty much the same. However, about 30% of the population are able to rewire their attachment system. I am one of those people. I like to call myself a recovering anxious attached. But if I'm dating someone who's an avoidant, it does trigger the anxiety in me a lot more. So now, with all of this awareness, I really make an effort that whoever I'm dating, I make sure that they are not avoidant, because it just keeps re-wounding me the exact same way as before. Now, when we were children, we almost create like a blueprint, a map of how relating works as adults. And so there's another thing I want to talk to you about, which is attractions of deprivation. And an attraction of deprivation is when we are drawn to people who embody the worst characteristics of our primary caregiver, because the mind works in a loop. So what it's trying to do is it's trying to recreate the scene of the crime, hoping that maybe just now you'll finally be able to heal. So if I just overgive and I'm constantly negating my needs and just putting your needs on a pedestal, then maybe I'll earn that love that I didn't get from my father. Or if I just save you and I constantly just take care of you and take care of you, then maybe I'll get the validation that I never received as a child. And so what's interesting about attractions of deprivation is often we equate this with chemistry. And so this is what I mean by your chemistry compass. And so if you are in this room and you didn't raise your hand when I asked that question because your logical mind and your urges and your body are in sync, then that's amazing. You're doing a great job. But for the majority of the other people in this room, I suspect that your chemistry compass might be a little bit broken. And so I'm going to tell you about a story about my upbringing and how my chemistry compass got completely broken, and I've been trying my entire life to piece it back together. I grew up in a very traditional Chinese household. My father was an entrepreneur and pretty much a tyrant. He put the family fifth on the totem pole. My mother always supported him and put her needs last to support him. He was never around, but if I got good grades, then maybe he would give me some attention. And so guess what happened when little Amy grew up? I was drawn to people and had chemistry with people who had the exact same sort of dynamic. People who were unavailable, emotionally aloof, who were always away, either physically or emotional, and those were the people that I was like, oh, you're so sexy. In fact, my kryptonite, and this little guy, if you see, he's wearing headphones, were DJs. DJs and club promoters, oh my God. You owned a club? Oh, game over. I was just so into you. And if you're a DJ club owner here, I'm sorry, but it's really hard to date you guys. And so, okay, DJs and club promoters in my early 20s, and then towards my late 20s, I moved that attraction towards startup entrepreneurs and founders. We're working 80 hours a week, and we're never available. I'm always clamoring for their time. And I was like, no, there's no pattern here. There's nothing wrong. But the emotional experience was exactly the same as when I was a child. Fighting for attention, overcompensating, hoping maybe you will finally love me. Waiting and waiting to see if maybe you'll change and finally give me attention and prioritize me. The emotional experience was exactly the same as my emotional experience with my father. So I had some work to do, and I knew that my chemistry compass was broken. So what does a dating columnist do? You do a self-experiment and you use yourself as a case study, which is exactly what I did. And so about 2 years ago, I set out to fix my chemistry compass. And I was so frustrated with dating that I said, okay, I'm going to be open-minded and go on a date with anyone who seems healthy, who intentionally wants to date me, and is emotionally available. And so I did that. And this experiment went on for about 8 months. And in those 8 months, I dated around 8 different people multiple times. And one of the guys who was like number 2, his name is Chris. I remember our second date, I said, hey, just listen, I don't have attraction towards you, but, if you want to just like hang out and like be homies and like there's no pressure, then that's cool. And he's like, yeah, sure, like I just want you in my life, want to get to know you, yada, yada. I'm like, sweet, awesome. So I keep doing these dates and they're not working and no chemistry is building. I'm like, this whole experiment's going bust. And 8 months later, I'm having dinner with Chris. It's our 8th time hanging out. And I remember this key moment when we're having dinner, and then I just pause and I look at him across the dinner table and I go, you're handsome. And just like that, chemistry sparked. But you see, chemistry was built in a very different way with Chris. It was built because of his character. It was getting to know him and seeing his values. It was feeling comfortable with him and feeling safe and trusting him. And so if I didn't have those 7 people before Chris, I would have never been able to feel chemistry with him. Because the way that we change our beliefs is it's done on a ladder. You don't go from being drawn to and attracted to super unhealthy, toxic, unavailable people here to suddenly completely healthy like that. It doesn't work that way because it's so shocking to your brain that your brain rejects it. And so what you need to do is rung by rung, you actually need to feel and experience what healthy feels like. Not just think it, not just read it in books, you actually have to experience it. That's what starts to rewire your subconscious mind. And so basically, what happens is human beings, we like what is familiar to us. This is the same when it comes to food, when it comes to music, when it comes to people. And so if what you were used to, like in my scenario, was unavailability, drama, and chaos, you are going to be drawn to that as an adult. That's going to be your homeostasis. That's what you are going to consider normal. And when someone else comes along who's healthy, who's communicative, who has high emotional intelligence, that's going to be alien to you. And you're going to go, that's so boring. Does that ever resonate with you guys? When you're like, oh my gosh, the healthy, awesome person who likes me, but I find them so boring. That's a cue that your chemistry compass might need a little bit of fixing. And so I want to talk to you about attraction, because attraction happens on a spectrum. And so at Renew, I work with a lot of people who've been so hurt and scorned by love that they go this complete other end of the spectrum, where they go to someone that they have absolutely zero chemistry with because there's no risk of them getting hurt. I am not saying that you do this. This is a coping mechanism. And then on the other hand, with this cool guy over here, this is the one that you're like, oh my God, you're so bad for me, but I just want to rip my clothes off for you. You also don't want to go over there. Now, again, if your chemistry compass is working for you and that works, amazing. But for the other ones where it's not aligned, this is not what you should listen to, because that polarity, that intense chemistry is likely an indicator that they're wounding you the exact same way that your primary caregiver did. And so what I'm asking you to just try on for a moment is to give a chance to the people that are right here in the middle. This guy, see? So friendly. And you might not feel this crazy emotional stimulation in the beginning. And it's not your fault that that's what you're looking for, because we are raised in a culture that is so addicted to lust. We want constant stimulation, from the fairy tales that we were fed when we were children to the romantic movies that we see as adults. There is always this storyline of high, high, low, low, the Romeo and Juliet, the drama, the chase, the anxiety, the excitement, and we equate that with love, but that is not love, that is lust. And so I want to explain to you how attraction and love works in the brain. So the way that love works in the brain is there's actually 3 mating drives in the brain that all intertwine to create love. However, they are not all necessarily connected to each other. The first one is lust. And this is driven by testosterone. This was Mother Nature's way of making us have sex with as many people as possible. The second mating drive is attraction, and this is driven by dopamine. Dopamine is that pleasure, feel-good chemical. It's what's released when you do cocaine, when you eat chocolate, when you have orgasm, when you have a crush on someone and they return your interest, and what makes you obsessive and feel euphoric when you are newly dating someone and makes you feel crushed so hard and feel awful when that person doesn't return your interest. This is Mother Nature's way of having you hone in on one person so that you could procreate. Now, the third type, mating drive, is attachment. And this is driven by vasopressin and oxytocin. This is the bonding chemical and the chemical that creates trust. It's what's secreted when a mother gives birth. It's what's secreted when she breastfeeds. It's what's secreted after orgasm. And it's Mother Nature's way of having you procreate and then stay with that person enough to raise that child through infancy. It's meant for you to bond. Now, love can be sparked by any one of these mating drives. Any one of these mating drives. And in the case of my example with Chris, it was sparked by the trust, which was the oxytocin, feeling safe. So there was more attachment and then attraction and then lust. But the storyline we're also used to, because of the way we're socialized, is that it's lust first and then the rest. It's this chronological order. And you have to feel this crazy chemistry in order for a relationship to have potential. But it's not the case. So I've spent a lot of time now talking about the belief systems. And now I'm going to go over the behaviors of attraction. And so, let's see. I want you to just imagine if we were all just mingling here at the assemblage, drinking our third eye elixir, opening elixirs. And let's see, say, Samarth and Taryn end up seeing each other across the room, and then they end up talking to each other. Who do you think would have made the first move? Samarth? If you do, raise your hand. Who do you think Taryn would have made the first move? Okay, cool. Many undecided. I know it's confusing. Well, a study actually showed when they actually hooked up cameras and eye tracking software to different bars, it's actually the woman that makes the first move. Now, it's a nonverbal first move, but it's actually her that creates a green light situation before the man has the courage to even approach. In fact, the woman in the study, in these many studies, made an average of 13 direct and indirect glances before the guy had the courage to come over. And before he comes over, he engages in what's called space maximization movements. And this is to actually show where he stands on the power hierarchy. And so he might slap his buddy's back, he might make himself really big, might put his hands right over here, and he makes an average of 19 space maximization movements, all while checking in to see if the apple of his eye is paying attention. Apple of her eye, yeah. And so if all goes well, and she's making the glances and looking down, and then he's like puffing his shoulders and looking powerful, if all this goes on, and this is all subconscious, by the way, and this mating dance happens, then the guy will approach, and he'll make a verbal approach, which might seem like, oh, it's a guy that's approaching, but it's not. And so this is how a spark happens and can eventually turn into a fire. So, how does this apply to you, and how can you actually learn how to hack your own attraction? Well, the cool thing is this, and I have experimented, is that you can actually practice to become more attractive. Because the person who actually gets approached the most in a room is not the most good looking. It's a person who looks the most approachable. And they've done countless studies to prove this. So in fact, in this study I was talking about, the woman who made an average of 35 glances around the room was approached by 4 men in 1 hour. So if you want to increase the amount of attraction that you have and how magnetic you are and how approachable you are, there's a few things that I want you to keep in mind. Number one is you want to be giving a green light. Psychologically, humans are very, very adverse to rejection. They will not approach you if they think they're going to be rejected. The next thing is you want to master the eye gaze. There is no spark that will come together without significant eye play. And so there's 3 different types of eye gazing, and I'm going to explain to you each one. So the first one is the room-encompassing glance. So this is when someone walks into a room, they'll arch their back, they'll lift up their chin, and they'll just kind of do a glance to see who's interesting. Okay? And then the second one is the short glance. So that's when you're like, oh, that guy over there. And then you just look, and you look down, you look down, trying to see if that you can catch that person's attention and see if they're interested in you back. Now, here's the thing. If that person doesn't return your gaze, you're just going to go off to someone else because human beings will like who likes them. So I'm going to repeat it again. If you show that you like someone, they will like you back more than if someone's kind of trying to give you a signal and you're like, ugh, are we trying to like play hard to get? That doesn't work. You actually have to show interest. It makes people like you more. Now the third one, and this is the really important one, is the eye gaze that's over 3 seconds. So what happens is they've done studies that show that if you make eye contact, Hugo, and then you look at him in the eye for about 3 seconds, sparks will start to happen, and on a psychological level, my attraction's going to start to build. Now, what might happen is if I'm looking too intensely and they're feeling, oh, like, what's going on, then you want to actually show a sign of submission. So that's when you'll go, you'll look, and then you might just tilt your head, or you'll touch your neck. Women will touch their hair, and eventually they'll actually touch somewhere around their mouth. And animals do this as well. So tilting the head is an actual sign of submission in the animal kingdom, and it works really well when you're flirting and you're doing this entire dance. Now, the last thing, if you can master this, then you're going to be real good, is you want the slow, earned smile. So after you make eye contact for about 3 seconds, you don't want to smile right away. No. He's got to earn that smile. So you look at him, and then you smile. Because then that actually puts in the person's mind like, oh, I'm special. This person's responding to me. You can't just go up to everyone and smile like a freak. Like, that's just not going to work. But here's the thing. I know it sounds kind of like weird, but you have to actually practice before you are in real-time situations. And so this is what I tell people when I coach them is when you're in New York City, walk down the street and make eye contact with every single person that you come across until they break gaze. Most of them are not going to look at you. But if they do, hold their eye contact until they break gaze. Even when you're buying something at the grocery store or with your barista, look at them in the eye until they break gaze. Because what you want to do is you want to practice in the field, so by the time you're at the assemblage drinking chakra opening elixirs and you spot someone, it becomes really natural, and then it's not contrived. And that's the whole thing about flirting and dating and connecting. All of these things are things that you can practice. And the very first thing it takes is just to have awareness. So we've talked about our beliefs and having awareness of what those limiting beliefs and subconscious patterns are so that we can then start to rewire them. And it takes practice. And then we talked about connecting, and it's the same thing. Some people are born with it better than others, but it can be hacked. And if you can practice it, it eventually becomes very natural to you. If you're not getting the results that you want in relationships, the common denominator is you. It's not the city you're in. It's not the app that you're on. It's not the leads coming in. The common denominator is there's something inside you that's not aligned with your subconscious and your conscious. Just remember this. If you change the inside, the outside will follow. Thank you.